Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 8th of January 2024, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me by video link today, we have Alex Thomson and Mark Anderson. We're going to start off with the Horizon IT scandal. We were talking about this on Friday's programme. MPs talking about it today, as we'll see in a second. Here's David Davis, first of all, and he's saying, of all the cases depending on a single lie, depend on one single lie, and that is nobody but the postmasters and mistresses could access their computers. We know that to be untrue. Now, so of course, this is about the postmasters and postmistresses accused of fraud by the Post Office following bugs with the Horizon IT system. If you want more of the background on this, have a look at Friday's news programme. David Davis went on to say this: I see no real reason, no logical reason you can't have a mass appeal on that basis. And the reason for this is because many actually the vast majority of the postmasters and postmistresses who were prosecuted by the Post Office for alleged fraud are still living under that prosecution and under that guilty verdict, even though they were not guilty. It's absolutely clear they weren't guilty. Andrew Bridgen is probably the only other MP in the House of Commons at the moment who has been campaigning on this for many years. He said, despite being one of the first MPs to raise concerns about the Post Office Horizon scandal and one of only two of that five who remain in elected office, I've still not been called to give my evidence to the Horizon scandal public inquiry. I'm repeatedly told I would be called before Christmas, and he's wondering which Christmas. And then he has an article published in TCW today, if you want to read more about his 14-year fight to deal with this. So I recommend reading this article and getting a bit more background on the whole thing. In the meantime, there is a campaign. The campaign has been running. There's a petition here on 38 Degrees with over 1 million signatories already, calling for Paula Venables of the Post Office to have her CBE taken away from her. Now, who is she? Well, she is a former Anglican priest, and she was chief executive of the Post Office, which we've got to remember, the Post Office wholly owned by the UK government at the moment. So she was CEO from 2012 to 2019, and she had also held other roles within the organisation. She was given a CBE for services to the post offices in 2019, and then she left just before the High Court judgment, which basically said that the management of the company had punished postmasters for mistakes in their own computer system. She took more than £400,000 in pay and bonuses when she left. So anyway, calls for her CBE to be stripped. I think it goes beyond the removal of honours here. She needs to be facing a court case herself, in my opinion. Anyway, the inquiry is back in action this week. So here it is. And one of the first things they're going to do is to hear from a partner at a company called Burgess Salmon. This is the law firm that is now representing the Post Office. So the inquiry has confirmed that it will hold a further hearing regarding the Post Office's disclosures to the inquiry. And that's going to be held on the 12th of January 2024. So that's this week. Sir Wyn Williams announced the intention to hold a hearing after evidence from representatives of the Post Office, Herbert Smith Freehills and KPMG revealed process failings and potentially deeper-rooted problems related to the Post Office disclosure. So in other words, there have been questions about whether the Post Office has been providing full disclosure of documents from the beginning, and clearly those questions continue. And so they are going to call in the legal team to inquire more about those. But if we look at the actual hearing schedule, then they're saying that Phase 4 is examining action against sub-postmasters and others with respect to policy making, audits, investigations, civil and criminal proceedings, knowledge of and responsibility for failures in investigation and disclosure. And that starts tomorrow. So in the meantime, the Post Office Horizon System Compensation Bill continues to make its way through Parliament. That's currently in the House of Lords for its second and third readings, and also the report and committee stages. This all starts this week as well. But we've also got to keep in mind that since this began, the government hasn't decided to abandon Fujitsu, who is the company that has provided this appalling system to the post office and is part of the cover-up without question, because the government has given, since 2013, £3 billion in contracts to Fujitsu for IT services since then. So apparently we continue to reward those who are causing the biggest problems. So anyway, we'll have more on this in due course. Today is an important day because it's a day of action in Germany. Alex is going to talk about this in 1 second. This is Christine Anderson pushing this out. It's the first 2024 Germany-wide Action Day. Huge numbers of farmers and their tractors out on the streets, as we can see on screen at the moment. So Alex, let me welcome to the program. Give us some more on this.
Well, it's going to be difficult to give you too much more, Mike, because the German mainstream media, or as we now increasingly like to call them, the legacy media, have been scrupulous in their silence. But in a moment, I will bring up some details from one of the painstaking Substack bloggers who have taken the place of the failing media. Just before we move on to that, though, Nick Wallace's book, that's Wallace with an IS at the end, called The Great Post Office Scandal, is very well worth reading on what you were just covering. postofficescandal.uk. You can order it direct and you don't need to go through any nefarious middleman publishers. And there's a principle at stake there, which we'll see later in the news as well, which is that the corporate underbelly of the Crown has captured the prosecutorial bodies to such an extent that a private company can press a button, run a script dressed up as AI or algorithms, but it's just a flowchart saying, probably guilty. And that's what happened with these sub-postmasters, ordinary mom and pop stores, to use American parlance, who got this great privilege of holding a post office franchise in the store. But let's go on to Germany. Now, Epimetheus is one of the best bloggers around from Germany, and Die Fackel 2.0, the Torch 2.0, is his brand. And he's reporting that the German people are going on general strike, which is quite something for such an orderly nation as Germany. And this will be in the show notes for people to follow. But in summary, he's saying that there's a situation in Germany that's now quite explosive. And he really has a justified bugbear about the legacy media. So let's see what has been raked up. First of all, the background to the discontent. Last Sunday, there was another poll of people by phone and also online of how they would vote in the next regularly scheduled general election, which is autumn 2025. So it's not a short-term knee-jerk question, but how are you intending to vote next year? And you can see that the three parties that make up the coalition, the Red Socialists, the very dark blue or black Union, which is the Christian Democrats, and the Greens, they're all losing support, even if it's only by 1 percentage point since last time. But it's a gradual, inexorable process. At 5% and just underneath that, at 3%, you will see the threshold to get into the Bundestag. You see that there's quite a rise there for Alternative für Deutschland, Christina Andersen's party. More moves afoot to ban that party outright, and some of the more moderate wing of that party are seeing the writing on the wall and forming a new party now, possibly including the former general protector of the German constitution, Hans-Georg Maaßen. So that's going to be a real kick in the teeth for the establishment. Also is illustrating the degree of discontent in Europe's economic powerhouse, Germany. This was done for ARD, the mainstream and indeed publicly funded media there, directly funded by taxes. We'll see how Britain does that later in the news with its public broadcasting. But the question this time was, how content are you with the German government at federal level? Now, the light and dark greens together are those who are in any way pleased with the performance of the government, and that stops at 17% or 1/6 of the population. The remaining 5/6 of those polled were either not content or utterly discontent, gar nicht zufrieden, with the performance of the government. And that's before this latest scandal kicked in, which is the first in a series of what might happen in other European countries, whereby what we know in Britain as red diesel, most European countries call it that as well, that is not given sales tax or value-added tax for the purpose of agricultural machinery, that is going to be removed because the Greens in the coalition wish it so. It's already been pinched to the maximum in Germany and bordering countries. I have found out very recently that neighbouring Belgium even sends farmers a tax bill when they voluntarily turn up for their local municipalities and go onto the public roads to clear snow, for example. They will then be told, no, for that amount of fuel you used, you now have to pay back owing taxes, even though it was in the public service. So what else has Epimetheus found? Well, The Twitter account Professor Freedom says, and the Google Translate has failed to get the acronym right here, the ER in the middle there, so I'll give that for you, says when the farmers dump their manure in Berlin soon, and they are already there at the main monuments in Berlin with police barricades up, then, says Professor Freedom, the ER, which stands for the public law, that is their equivalent of saying mainstream or publicly funded broadcasters, will be there, and they'll be reporting in detail about farmers' involvement with Nazis, COVID deniers, swearers or babblers, and Putin friends. It will be a party. In the extremely quiet Baltic town of Volgast, population of barely 10,000, you've got that many protesters, and this is regarded even in German terms as a very sedate part of the world with orderly and quiet people. And they're chanting, "Wir haben die Schnauze voll, wir haben die Schnauze voll." We're fed up to the back teeth. And this gentleman, who is a financial markets journalist, is wondering what's in store for him, even in that quietest backwater of Germany. Epimetheus then goes on to report that train drivers, railroad engineers in US parlance, are going to join the protests next week. Germany's railway system is already creaking at the seams. It's not the efficient beast that many people fondly remember it as. And a financial site, Finanzmarktwelt, reports that the epicenter of the protests is in that state of Saxony. Always my top bet for the first state to secede from the German Federation, where, according to the local, state-funded broadcasters, 19 out of all 20 motorway on-ramps are going to be blocked on this Monday. We'll see whether that's true at the end of this day. There's also protests on highways, supermarkets, and petrol stations, and there are thought to be over 30 demonstrations throughout Germany. Let's see where they are. They are, well, far more than 30 on that map. There's one just over the border from me in Cleves, but I won't be able to get to that. And you can see that it really encompasses rural, urban, Catholic, Protestant, north, south, east, west, very much a pan-German affair. So we'll see what comes of it. Sorry for moving that forward. But Germany is likely to see more troubled times than we've seen for a while. All of the neighbouring countries have seen it come to this. The Germans have held back until now.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Alex. Now, Mark, let's bring you onto the program. And, you got a little bit of a preview of that. The World Health Organization, what's the latest?
Important stuff. Of course, why are we reporting this? We have to keep in mind that if a World Pandemic Treaty is consummated around May 27th, when the next World Health Organization shindig is for that purpose, if that's consummated, it's going to reduce, by all indications, national and personal autonomy to opt out of vaccine mandates if and when the next pandemic is declared. And of course, the WHO autocrats and bureaucrats are always telling us it's not a question of when, it's not a question of if, rather, it's a question of when the next pandemic will be declared. So the centralization of authority that very likely would come out of the intensified international health regulations and the creation of a pandemic treaty is keeping in mind why we report this, why this is so vital. But there's a slide here that just gives the basic thrust of this. The WHO deadline is less than 3 weeks away. This has to do with the international health regulation deadline, where they have to have those sewed up 4 months before May 27th, when they start working on the treaty in Geneva. And that's a very required deadline. Here we have in the next slide, according to Article 55 of the International Health Regulations, this is from the reliable source James Roguski of Los Angeles. He's been on UK Column before. According to Article 55, the deadline to submit amendments for consideration at the 77th World Health Assembly is January 27th of this month, 2024, of course. If the final version of the proposed amendments to the International Health Regulations is not properly submitted before the deadline, then all such amendments, technically, that is, may not be considered during the 77th World Health Assembly, which begins May 27th, 2024. James Roguski is always very open about those that want to contact him to get involved. His email is james.roguski@gmail.com. People can check out his contact info on the show notes. He gives out his phone number. And moving on from there, we have Article 55, and this is where the requirement comes from for the record. The text of any proposed amendment shall be communicated to all state parties by the Director General at least 4 months before the Health Assembly meets, at which it is at which it is proposed for consideration. And so that's where that comes from, Article 55 in the amendment rules themselves. The mischief that may be involved, according to Roguski and according to what I've been looking at briefly, is that James Roguski believes, and I concurred when we had a conversation yesterday, Mike, Roguski believes that on the one hand, the international health regulation amendments are not ready to be considered in time in terms of having complete amendments. They're not ready to be considered in time to meet that 4-month deadline. But the issue at hand is that the powers that be within the World Health Organization may float some kind of tentative amendment, some sort of document, just to have something in the hopper, just so they can say they met that January 27th deadline 4 months before May 27th. So this is the mischief that might be involved, and whatever they throw in the hopper would be incomplete, possibly containing some kind of propaganda, in Roguski's opinion. And this last slide that I have up here is the U.S. negotiator, Colin McIff, and he is with the Health and Human Services Deputy Director, Office of Global Affairs, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. U.S. people, and others really, but U.S. people especially, can float some notes to him on Twitter. That's his Twitter account, Colin McIff, at CLM McIff, MCIFF. And McIff, he'll answer, pardon the pun. Maybe people can get their message across to him about their concerns. But this is the vital update for now, Mike.
Okay, thanks. And Alex, on the same topic then, what's happening in the EU?
We have a codicil to what Mark has just presented. A key phrase in what Mark just mentioned was state parties, or states parties in legal language, which is the member states of an organization who, as sovereign executives, get together and negotiate a treaty. That's the whole raison d'etre, the sine qua non of having a treaty. However, Dr. Meryl Nass, who's well known to our viewers, from previous appearances on symposiums on UK Column, has got some friendly members of the European Parliament, led by Caroline Anderson as before, to ask both the World Health Organization and, where they'll have more success, the EU itself, being MEPs, they should manage that, whether it's true that the European Union has been possibly suggesting changes to the texts, to the IHR and the treaty, which is now called a convention, a top-level diplomatic document, on behalf of its member states. So just a brief glimpse of the letter, which will be in the show notes, written by Daughter Freedom and Justitia Europa, writing to these MEPs, saying that we understand that the EU, although it's not a signatory to the WHO, and it can't be, although of course we know that the WHO co-opts the super rich like Bill Gates to pretend to be countries if you pay enough millions and billions, but they're saying that the basis for the EU acting on behalf of its member states there is an obscure article of the Treaty on the Functioning of the EU, the technical treaty that sets out the competence of the EU, which can only be given to it and revoked by the member states that called the EU into being. That's how the whole of international law works, of course. And they're saying this is flagrantly wrong because that article only allows for cross-border health issues within the EU to be tackled by the European Commission. No way, Jose, does it allow the EU to remove fundamental freedoms from members of its individual states.
Okay, and two other people that have taken part in UK Column symposiums in the past are Taylor Hudak and Arnie Buchart. Taylor has published on the Last American Vagabond website an interview with Arnie Buchart. Now, he of course, is a pathologist who's been looking into the effects of mRNA on people. And so this is quite an in-depth interview. This was recorded last May, just before his passing. And has now been released. So I'd like to encourage everybody to have a look at that. Just to let you know as well, that the Daily Mail has finally decided that it wants to get on the bandwagon with respect to the vaccine injured. So they were tweeting this out this morning. Vaccine victims left with life-changing injuries from the Oxford AstraZeneca COVID jabs say they've been censored online when speaking out. Now, of course, that censorship has been going on for a very long time. We've covered it in detail on the UK Column. And in fact, the reason we were chucked off YouTube in the first place was because we attempted to carry an interview with the wife of someone who had been severely vaccine injured. And that resulted in our being deplatformed from YouTube and from Vimeo, in fact. But the Daily Mail, just looking at the language that they use, they talk about claims, they talk about beliefs, they talk about the man who is taking a legal case against AstraZeneca at the moment. In fact, that, just so that everybody knows, is a father of two called Jimmy Scott, and he suffered a blood clot and life-changing injuries as a result. So anyway, that is going on at the moment. The Daily Mail attempting to get onto and pretend to support people, but in fact, you read the language in the article, and it's not much support there at all, as far as I can see. So, okay, let's move on from there. If you like what the UK Column does, you'd like to support us, please head over to community.ukcolumn.org. There are options to help us out there. Your support very much needed, so please do join us if you possibly can. You could pick something up at the UK Column shop, but do share anything that you find on the platforms, especially ukcolumn.org and ukcolumnextracts.co.uk. Now, tomorrow, an interview on farming and food production and how people are coming together. There's Marianne Hill and Michelle Turner coming together to bring farmers and communities together to attempt to make the food chain a much more productive situation. That will be going at 1 p.m. tomorrow. Charles will be the interviewer for that, so please join us for that at 1 p.m. Yesterday, we held the symposium on genocide and empire, examining October the 7th and the geopolitics of the war on Palestine. That was, I thought, a fantastic event. Thank you to everybody that joined us live for that. The recording of the full live stream is on the UK Column website at the moment, and over the coming days we will be changing that to individual presentations so you can share the individual presentations. But the issue of whether genocide was taking place in Gaza was brought up, and I just want to bring out one little clip from the symposium. This is Richard Falk commenting on genocide.
Just want to move this on to question of genocide. So we've got probably a fairly straightforward question here, which Richard can answer. One question which came in just said, what do you say to people who say that this is not genocide, it's simply war? I'll just pass that to Richard to quickly address before we get on to other issues in relation to the genocide question.
Well, as I tried to suggest, Israel can't, as the occupying power, has no authority to wage war. It has the authority to reestablish its security by reasonable and appropriate means, while upholding its primary obligation as the occupying power of protecting, not decimating, the civilian population. The whole emphasis of the Geneva Conventions when it comes to belligerent occupation is the duty of the occupying power to protect the civilian population. And this kind of response that had very little relevance to future Israeli security, in fact, was obviously dysfunctional from that perspective, suggests that it has to be judged on the basis of what kind of operation this was. And given the statements of the Minister of Defense, the Prime Minister, and the religious leaders in the Israeli cabinet, there is no reasonable doubt that the intention was genocidal. And I would be very surprised, even if a relatively conservative International Court of Justice does not agree with that assessment.
So, Alex, I'd just like to get your thoughts very, very briefly on that. I mean, Francis Boyle, who's the international human rights lawyer, has also agreed or decided or stated that he believes the South African efforts to bring Israel to the European Court of Justice on this are going to be successful. Just very briefly, what are your thoughts?
People get in a funk about this, Mike, because they go to the ceasefire line of 1967 or they go back to the interwar era. But the key point that brings it to a fulcrum is 47-48. And the Israeli claims, pushed now by the likes of Natasha Hausdorff, the dual citizen barrister who's always on Sky News and the like, is that Israel took a kind of terra nullius, a no man's land in 48. Because neither the Palestinians nor Jordan and Egypt, respectively, had made a state out of those territories. This has not just been voted against in the UN at General Assembly and Security Council levels, which could rightly be perhaps disregarded as a political action by its nature by force of numbers, but it's also been accepted by the International Court of Justice here in The Hague and by Israel's own Supreme Court, sitting as the High Court of Justice, that in a test case upheld that the Geneva Convention, I don't know about the 77 annexes, but the original 49 document and this 1907 Hague regulations were of full effect in this case. So that's where the stink and the upset goes on. Israel is doing a special pleading that it kind of took over a bunch of savages and that there was nothing there, therefore there's no occupation. And its own judicial authorities have refuted that.
Okay, thank you for that. Let's come back to the UK then, Alex, and television licensing.
Yes, this is for the second time, this news, that Mark and anyone watching from the States might be nonplussed by how the British Crown goes about things, because here we have yet another case of cosy corporations masquerading as the Crown. We've made a decision to refer much less to legacy media and to go straight to source documents in this new year, but we will make an exception for general, good old-fashioned court reporters, such as the gentleman who's gone on behalf of the London Evening Standard to the courts this time, who have filleted some real information. So the headline is the most shocking bit, that a woman who had who was under basically a curatorship by her local authority in the borough of Tower Hamlets actually had a prosecution brought against her. And those with sharp eyes on big screens will see that TV licensing is brought through a controversial fast-track justice system called single judicial process, if the name serves me correctly, which I think is related to the Northampton bulk processing centres that our viewers brought our attention to some years ago. But here it is, the single justice procedure convicts people. How's this for the mother of democracies that likes telling other countries how to run their justice systems? It convicts thousands of people each week behind closed doors solely on written evidence. And the defendant's pleas in writing are not observed, are not run through by the pseudo-prosecutors before these prosecutions are obtained. It seems to be a target-hitting exercise. So let's see some details there. One here concerns that particular woman, and we haven't put it on screen, but the Guardian effectively at her local council wrote to the prosecutors saying, "You've made a mistake. Direct debit, for those watching abroad, that's the automated bank payment month by month, failed, which is a common thread in many of these themes in a time of bank censorship and bank inefficiency. So I've reset the direct debit. It should be going through." Get this, a magistrate, that's somebody who is a member of the executive pretending to be a judge on behalf of the government, accepted the guilty plea on her behalf that was entered on her behalf by her curator or guardian, and decided, well, they would, wouldn't they, not to have a full open court hearing where a jury might hear some untoward things. So to add insult to injury, the woman was convicted and given a 6-month conditional discharge, but told to pay a victim surcharge to the poor BBC of £26. Now, this is not just something which has gone on in that particular borough, but also in Eltham in South East London. I think the Standard picked up on this again because it's within their remit in Greater London. And here we have Chilly John Carney. I recommend people subscribe to him on YouTube because he has made a special work of going into these cases. Chilly John Carney, just in a very brief clip, describes what happened when the Eltham gentleman wrote to defend himself. Again, it wasn't considered in time, it seemed, when he was prosecuted, and said, "Listen, my wife's disabled. She's not able to handle finances. The direct debit was in her name and got cancelled." And then there's more to the story, which he'll describe very briefly.
The next we heard was when they turned up at the door. Okay, so you set the license up at the door. He got his commission that day, the enforcement officer, sold you a license, but you still ended up in court. And that sounds fair. That sounds like a fair situation, does it? And this article goes on. There's more. There's a lot more. It's ridiculous. What a ridiculous system this is.
I can see Mark watching in shock on my large monitor, and well, he should, because you heard correctly there. An enforcement officer turned up and sold, through the means of a payment card, which was on the excuse that direct debits couldn't work, which I doubt, sold a payment card. There may have been extra commission in that for him or her, the very same day the prosecution went through. And this is an example fished out by the Evening Standard of the kind of written defences that are not seen by the prosecutors before people are taken to court. I don't have an ability to write. My mother's writing for me. I have epilepsy, type 1 diabetes. I'm trying to live off benefits. My TV wasn't working when the officer came round. This is often something which is disputed. Enforcement officers will routinely say TV was found to be working and it's disputed that it was, etc. And the license fee's been paid for the months in the interim. What's to be done about this? Well, Martin Geddes, who has a Substack blog called Future of Communications, has gone straight to the top, has gone to the Minister of Culture, Media and Sport. Also in the show notes will be the legal backstory from his previous blog, so you can see his detailed argument. But the headlines presented now to the Minister in Westminster is this. He says, the fraud is that the trading name TV licensing, which people in Britain will see at the bottom of websites and TV pages, is presented to the public as a legal person, but it isn't. A trademark cannot own a copyright. This cannot be an accident. And he goes on, this conversion of a trademark into a chameleon-like legal person, I'd love to hear from intellectual property lawyers to correct or add to this. This allows the BBC to receive the revenue assets because it's a respectable Crown-like brand, but the legal liabilities go to Capita, the often discussed and often failing middleman that inserts itself in many parts of British life. Geddes himself is a victim of this fraud. Capita usurped the case as an interloper with no standing. He goes on, correspondence is being sent to the public under the brand TV licensing, even with a copyright icon, with no legal person attached to it. And you interact with changes between the BBC and Capita at their whim. They put on different masks depending on which way the wind's blowing. The BBC demands that checks be made payable to TV licensing, which isn't a legal person, and the direct debit mandates have no fixed legal person attached. Perhaps the banks aren't so crazy to stop the direct debits in some cases. Martin Geddes finishes, my opinion is that the only possible purpose of presenting a trademark as a person is to deceive. It's reasonable to presume that this has been approved of at the highest levels at the BBC and Capita. And he correctly warns that at some point a test case will be brought.
Sooner the better, Alex, is what I would say. And I would echo people should subscribe to Chili John Carney on YouTube for much more on the issue of TV licensing and the BBC. And now let's move over to the United States then. Well, actually not, because although we're talking about Donald Trump, this is the Foreign Office up to their work again. So this is apparently an exclusive for the I newspaper. And they're saying that members of the UK's foreign policy establishment are concerned about the impact that Donald Trump returning to power would have on Britain. Now, of course, they've always been concerned about Donald Trump. That's why the original Russiagate document was produced by Christopher Steele, a British intelligence agent, shall we say. And so the Foreign Office is now building a new dossier in the run-up to the US election later on this year. And of course, Mark, we could argue that that is election interference, could we not?
Oh, absolutely, of a sort. This reflects what's going on, as I'm about to report, with the Democratic Party and the greater media here in concocting and misrepresenting what's been going on in the courts against Trump. And if with your green light, Mike, I'll proceed.
Go for it.
Yeah, here we have in this first slide just some headlines here, just to see what the legacy media is up to. This is NBC News recently. Colorado Supreme Court, we're told, kicks Trump off the state's 2024 primary ballot for violating the U.S. Constitution. And you can see in the background of this anchor of NBC, Trump disqualified from Colorado ballot. And it makes it sound absolute, but it's not necessarily absolute. Let's move on from there. Here we have just a little snippet from that same article dated December 19th, this past December, NBC News. In a bombshell decision, bombshell, Colorado's Supreme Court on Tuesday ruled that former President Trump's candidacy in the state's primary next year is prohibited on constitutional grounds. This first of its kind ruling, we're told, stems from a lawsuit that focused a little known provision in the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. Similar challenges in other states have proven unsuccessful. Let's go on from there. And another headline, just as an example, Associated Press, Trump is blocked. Trump is blocked from the GOP in the 2 states. Can he still run for president? And we'll keep flowing from there. This is some counterpoint, some much needed counterpoint from a respected writer, Paul Craig Roberts, former with the Reagan Treasury Department under Ronald Reagan. He's now chairman of the Institute for Political Economy. Readers and viewers can check out his CV on the show notes. Here's a headline, though, from important columns recently. Democrats facing election wipeout resort to desperate actions. So Roberts is believing that the Democrats are very vulnerable in election-wise. And here are some very important key quotes from Paul Craig Roberts. Neither do the Colorado Republicans understand. So it's not just a Democrat problem in all. In their appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court for a ruling on the Colorado State Court Constitution, the Republicans argued that the president is not an officer of the U.S. under the meaning of the, Let me try that again. In their appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court for a ruling on the Colorado State Court decision, the Republicans argued that the president in general is not an officer of the U.S. under the meaning of the provision in the 14th Amendment, that only Congress has the power to apply the insurrection provision, and that Colorado's ruling, if allowed to stand, would violate the people's ability to select candidates in primaries. And we have one more quote from Mr. Roberts. The persecutions of Trump are not legitimate. They are weaponizations of lawfare, designed to keep power in the hands of the ruling establishment. That these persecutions are not denounced by bar associations, by law schools, politicians, media, and the American people indicates that the weaponization of law is generally accepted now as a legitimate tool in the struggle for power. And this is a key part. The Democrats who falsely accuse Trump of election interference are now interfering themselves. And that mirrors, Mike, what you were saying about the dossier 2.0 on the other side of the pond. So this kind of blows the lid off the basic fact that Trump was never tried or successfully prosecuted or convicted of insurrection. So how can he be removed from both the ballots of Colorado and the state of Maine if he's never been convicted, much less, never been tried, much less convicted or sentenced or anything like that for actual insurrection? So it's a lot of legal legerdemain. It's a lot of misleading fakery going on, evidently. And I think that's something people need to understand at this juncture. And this is not a wholesale endorsement of Donald Trump by any means. This is just talking about media complicity in falsehoods and misleading the electorate. And your element on this, Mike, about that dossier just adds to the gravity of this. So that's sufficient for today.
Yeah, I would just ask, Mark, I mean, because I don't actually see any prospect of Trump doing anything particularly useful. He certainly didn't in his first 4 years. Maybe you think that it would be different in the second term. I think that there's a bit of panic going on from the UK government, at least, with respect to Trump, because I don't necessarily think that he's capable of achieving what he says he is.
Yeah, I think, well, it's a mixed bag. In his first term, Donald Trump did pull the U.S. back out of the Paris Climate Agreement. He did it on the eve of Bilderberg in June 2017. He called out the media, the fake news, which was probably his, you might say, claim to fame. He made a lot of headway with that. He did call out the Fed a couple times, and he began to question the Federal Reserve's policies and thinking more than most presidents have done in recent decades. But then he seemed to boost the vax mandate without much counterpoint, without much rethinking of the situation. I'm not sure what duress he might have been under. So Trump does come out as something of a mixed bag, but compared to the Biden administration, many conservatives, especially here in Texas, constitutionalists, are yearning to get Trump back in because they believe at least it would put us somewhat on the right track, Biden being such an utter disaster, especially with the border. So that's kind of how it crunches out right now, Mike. But the media lies and misleading quotes on this, making it look like Trump is guilty of something he isn't, thereby wrongly legitimizing what Colorado and Maine have done. That's the main story here.
Yes, well, indeed. Well, one country that he likes to consider an enemy, of course, is China. China is under some sanctions for one reason or another. They've decided to hit back on sanctions. So here's the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokeswoman talking about arms sales to China's Taiwan region. So she said it's a blatant violation of the One China principle and the stipulations of the 3 China-US joint communiques, particularly the 17th of August joint communique of 1982. And she went on to say, and the illegal unilateral sanctions the US has imposed on Chinese companies and individuals under various false pretexts seriously harm China's sovereignty and security interests. So in response to these gravely wrong actions taken by the US and in accordance with China's anti-foreign sanctions law, China has decided to sanction 5 US defense industry companies. And those 5 companies are BAE Systems Land and Armament, Alliant Tech Systems Operation, AeroVironment, and Viasat and Datalink Solutions. So those are the companies that China has decided to sanction. She went on to say, we urge the United States to abide by the One China principle and the 3 China-US joint communiques, observe international law and basic norms governing international relations, stop arming Taiwan and stop targeting China with illegal unilateral sanctions. Otherwise, there'll be strong and resolute response from China. So China-US relations not at their best at the moment, but same for China-UK. Because, this is the website of China's Ministry of State Security. Basically, they are claiming that MI6 recruited a foreign national, so not a Brit and not a Chinese, a third country national that they're calling Huang. They recruited him in 2015, and he has been spying on Britain's behalf, on MI6's behalf, ever since, including passing over various documents with various degrees of classification with respect to secrecy. Alex, very briefly, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Is that something that is unusual? Because I would have thought that type of thing happens quite regularly.
Absolutely, it does. That's the whole point of running agents. And the more third country nationals you can bring to the table, the better, because they're more plausibly deniable.
So why do you think they're getting so upset about this particular case?
Well, it's timing. Timing is everything in espionage. You build up a backlog of such faux outrages and trot them out when the bilateral relationship is deteriorating. I think the Chinese MFA is definitely entering a new strident phase of self-confidence. I see that the state-owned Chinese shipping company Costco will not do any business with Israel or deliver to Israeli ports. And I think it's part of that general trend, really, to show their hand.
I mean, they have decided to crack down on what they're describing as foreign consultancies. And we've sort of seen the same kind of thing in Russia as well. I don't know whether that's something that we're seeing in the West with the Russian and Chinese counterparts.
Yes, you have to take different forms in different environments to do espionage, obviously, beyond diplomatic cover itself. In Russia and Eastern Europe, the Western agencies were able to use a lot of religious and NGO cover because of the nature of the societies and their degree of openness after decommunization. China hasn't allowed NGOs, so you would expect more to be done in a nation that's famously business-minded through consultancies. And that's really something that doesn't surprise. It's just a question, as I say, of why now. And that must be because the Chinese feel they have less to lose and more to gain.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you for that, Alex. Now let's move on to Estonia.
Yes, the main title in Tallinn, Postimees, has got a Russian language service, which we'll see here. And at the start of last month, I've been off since, so I haven't been able to cover it. They reported that the Prime Minister, Mrs. Kallas, had got a plan to ban people from the country if they dared to apply for a Russian Federation passport. So using machine translation just for convenience, we see that Interior Ministry Lauri Läänemets said in early November, also covered by Postimees, you can follow through and see the original announcement linked through here, said he was looking for ways to expel from Estonia those who decide to obtain Russian citizenship. I hasten to add that he said in that November announcement, this does not apply to the hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands at least of ethnic Russians in Estonia who already have Russian citizenship. Often it's their only citizenship because Estonia makes it jolly hard to get Estonian citizenship, nor would it apply to the children of Russian citizens who have it given to them by the parents' application from now on. But if you're an 18 plus resident of Estonia, and that could be a lifelong resident who's never got Estonian citizenship, and if you now apply for a Russian passport, you could be kicked out. So we read that the Prime Minister was written to by an ethnic Russian member of the parliament, the Riigikogu, called Mr. Chaplygin, who said, what's the legal basis for this? And not for the first time in this news, we see a novel international legal basis, namely that you're a threat to the state. How does this work? Well, allegedly, the idea is that under Article 241 of the Aliens Act, the Interior Ministry can say you're a security threat because you made a decision contrary to us. And there's even a bit more detail here in the Prime Minister's reply. The argument is, if you're 18, then clearly, because of our glorious independent media and our wonderful free democratic world that you enter in Estonia, it must be entirely evident to you that Russia is a criminal and terrorist state because it's attacked Ukraine. Therefore, there's no possible other motive for you to apply for Russian citizenship on the new fast track that Russia's announced, other than because you must be someone nefarious and you might be ready to attack Ukraine, ergo you're a threat to Estonia. No sense at all in international law, but it could lead to an exodus of ethnic Russians from the Balkans, despite the assurance given by the Interior Minister.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Now, speaking of a free media, then, when was it? October or so last year, we were talking about the fact that the EU's equivalent of the Online Safety Act would be coming into force at the end of the year. And one question in particular was, what would the effects be on Twitter or X? We start maybe to get an idea of that coming through.
We do, thanks to Reclaim the Net, which I think far better than anyone else online trawls the internet for anything concerning in the domain of media freedom and online freedom. And so the European Commission, in the form of its commissioner, Thierry Breton, has decided to do what he had long trailed he was going to do. Now that the Digital Services Act has gone through the European Parliament and become a law of the Council and Parliament, he, as commissioner, as the executive body, as it were, is going to have a go at Twitter. His formal grounds were announced, ironically enough, on Twitter, or X. The three things that he decided to highlight with his rather infantile hazard signs are suspected breach of obligations under this new EU legislation, obligations to counter illegal content and disinformation. That would be obligatory censorship to you and me, Mike. Suspected breach of transparency obligations, and this is a bit more of Eurocrat policy wonk talk, suspected deceptive design of the user interface. And we go to Reclaim the Net's write-up to find out the main point here, which is that the European Commission is currently looking into the operations stringently. It's unprecedented, but it was loudly trailed beforehand by Breton that he was going to do it, so it's no surprise. And Reclaim the Net's analysis is that the main thrust of the European Commission's case against Twitter or X will be that it may have breached EU law on risk management, data access, dark patterns, lack of censorship, and transparency in advertising. A mixed bag there, some things that most of us would agree with and some things that certainly none of our views would agree with, all lumped together as one infraction and transgression.
And of course, that's the justification that they'll always use to cover the intended outcome with things that many people can agree with. But Mark, let's come back to the United States and what's going on with legacy media.
Quite a bit. A very brief mention about the Trump segment. He is appealing the Maine and Colorado rulings about ballot access to the U.S. Supreme Court. Just wanted to mention that. Now, here we're showing in this slide the Civic News Company. And what this is probably roughly once a month, give or take, I'll be reporting about the new news ecosystem by the legacy media. they're trying to recreate themselves in certain realms. We've all heard the argument and the concern, oh, there's a news desert out here in the UK, Canada, the US. Local newspapers are closing. Local affiliates of radio and TV stations are closing. They're going belly up, and, oh, we're going to starve to death if we don't get enough legacy news content. Ha, ha, ha. Well, accordingly, and because of people like us, in my opinion, the powers that be are putting kind of a 2.0 legacy media together and trying to repopulate that desert. And our example this week, the main one, is Civic News Company. In this slide, we see Elizabeth Green, the CEO and co-founder of Chalkbeat. Now, the Civic News Company has two main elements: Chalkbeat, like chalk on a chalkboard, which is about education news, and VoteBeat, which is about elections. And they're limiting it to Texas, Michigan, my main two states, and a couple other states, not the whole nation. And we were showing there for a minute on that previous slide, I just wanted to mention real quick, of Elizabeth Green, we were showing that according to the 990 IRS tax form, she's pulling down, according to that form in 2021, $286,762 salary plus $42,000 and some change in perks. And the team behind Chalkbeat and VoteBeat is excited to introduce the Civic News Company. That's kind of the parent company. This is a little example of what they're telling consumers of their product and would-be consumers. As many of you know, we added a new newsroom to the Chalkbeat family when we launched VoteBeat. VoteBeat covers election administration and voting in, here's those states: Texas, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Arizona, etc. In much the same way that Chalkbeat covers public education, etc. There have been many benefits to creating VoteBeat, from affirming the power of Chalkbeat and our incredible community, to informing a conversation and decision-making process plagued by polarization and misinformation. In just a few months, our team revealed the fringe movement that drove an entire Texas county's election staff out of their job, we're told, and uncovered connections between Arizona's Dropbox vigilantes, get that, Dropbox vigilantes, and a national election disinformation system. I'll explain further now as we go along here. This is from the website of the Civic News Company and VoteBeat and Chalkbeat, etc. This part being from VoteBeat. Elections are in crisis, it says. Election extremists have targeted our democracy. Support VoteBeat's nonpartisan, nonprofit journalism to protect the power of the vote. So elections in crisis is not that there could be a hidden vote count, not that there could be a miscount, not that voting machines might malfunction or be programmed to flip the vote. The only problem is people are asking questions. The crisis is literally, according to this 2.0 legacy media, Civic News Company, and their outlets, the crisis is that people are asking questions. And this other article with that posting, it says, and this is about Gillespie County in Fredericksburg, Texas, a little bit west of Austin. What brought down one Texas county's entire election department? It was something in the water. And that's a reference to the fact that some people in Gillespie County have been getting into kind of the age-old process of questioning why municipalities are putting fluoride in water, which is a legitimate question for actual health concerns. It's not a communist plot. So the people that went to Gillespie County to watch the elections in 2020, the presidential election, were asking a lot of questions about the overall process. They were poll watchers, and the press, VoteBeat included, especially VoteBeat, was criticizing the people and quoting the people working for the election system who were critical of those who were asking questions. And at no time did the VoteBeat reporters ever actually find out what the poll watchers were concerned about in the 2020 elections in Gillespie County. Did they have legitimate concerns? VoteBeat's not even reporting on that. Now, in this next slide here, we have Dropbox watchers in Arizona connected to national effort from 2,000 Mules creators. This is another VoteBeat report stemming from the Civic News Company. And basically what this is saying is that the people watching the Dropboxes in Maricopa County in 2020, and there was a multiplicity of these drop boxes due to the COVID scare. So elections were much more based on people dropping their ballots in insecure boxes. Who had the keys to the boxes? Was it possible to replace the ballots that were put in the boxes? There was lots of security concerns, legitimate ones, about the boxes. And 2,000 Mules is a referral to Dinesh D'Souza, the filmmaker who produced a film, a documentary called 2,000 Mules, that outlined those concerns about drop boxes in Arizona and other states and those security concerns. So again, VoteBeat is completely ignoring any legitimate questions and just writing everyone off as conspiracy theorists and deniers. And so there's this creation of this new news ecosystem by the legacy media, and yet we're seeing there goes the new boss. Here's the new boss, same as the old boss, that kind of thing. The same old deceptive reporting techniques. Here in this next slide, we have the Civic News Company's numbers a little bit. They had revenues of 12.8 million, 12.8 million. Expenses of 11.9 million in 2022, I believe that is, and total assets 8.49 million. Total liabilities 491,000, I believe that is, and that's from the 990 filing in the state of New York. And from 2017 until 2021, they basically doubled their gifts and grants and contributions income. It was a little over 6 million in 2017. It doubled to about 12 million by about 2021, totaling over $43 million. And what this is, Mike, is Civic News Company gets tax deductible donations. So they're operating a lot like the BBC and the Public Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which, of course, is where PBS comes from in the States. So those that want to support the Civic News Company financially for what amounts to largely propaganda will get a tax deduction, and it results in that large war chest that I just mentioned. And here's the company they keep. VoteBeat and Civic News Company people were at a Democracy 360 program at the University of Virginia for the Karsh Institute of Democracy. And this is this past October. And we have, going from left to right in this slide, we have John Dickerson from CBS News in the upper left. Next to him, going to the right, we have Tom Donilon, current chair of BlackRock Investment Group, and he's also with the Trilateral Commission and currently on the Bilderberg Steering Committee. We have Arnie Duncan. Next to him, Obama's education secretary. Next to him, Eric Edelman, former Undersecretary of Defense for Policy Administration in the George W. Bush administration. Mike Emanuel, over from him with Fox News, chief Washington correspondent. And going down, we have people like Donald Baer to the lower left, former White House director of strategic planning under Clinton. Moving from there, Peter Baker, New York Times, chief White House correspondent. Laura Barron Lopez, White House correspondent for PBS NewsHour. And Bob Bauer, former Obama White House counsel. And then the next slide, we're kind of wrapping up here, a little bit more of the company they keep. Of course, third from left is Elizabeth Green of the Civic News Company. So she's right in with this crowd. And all the way over to the left, Susan B. Glasser, staff writer for The New Yorker. Jeffrey Goldberg, editor-in-chief of the highly propagandistic Atlantic magazine. And Anise Parker, president and CEO of LGBTQ-related activities and activism. And moving on from some of the topics covered at that 360 Democracy 360 conference last October, elections and governance. One of the press releases, for the sake of American democracy, candidates urged to commit to free and fair elections and the peaceful transfer of power. And under the trusted information heading, you're being fed lies, how Americans can find truth in the age of misinformation, and so on. And what this boils down to, Mike, is calling for the peaceful transfer of power and asking candidates to commit to free and fair elections is code for saying, don't rock the boat too much, don't ask too many questions. We need to accept the election outcomes as an article of faith. We don't need to ask a lot of thorny questions about voting machines. We don't need to listen to poll watchers too much, even though they have a right to be there and they have a legitimate function, and so on and so forth. That last slide was another one of the participants, a couple of them actually, Margaret Spellings and John Bridgeland. And they wrote in a USA Today article recently, well, fairly recently, December of 2021. People can read about it, but they're talking about and warning people about social media conspiracy theories, and that this new news ecosystem is the way to go, basically, and they're representing that. So this is part of what's part of more to come on this, Mike. There's lots to talk about. We'll be talking about an organization called GRIST soon, so
Okay.
they fit into this as well.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Right, Alex, let's end with King Charles then.
Just a coda to what was discussed on Friday's news about the Prince Andrew fallout from the Epstein document unsealings. The royal family's own website points out that Prince Andrew is still, and this is defined by a 1937 statute, the king can't change it unilaterally, he's still a councillor of state. That's councillor with an SE, so he's not sitting on a council with a CI, but he is counselling the king. And this comes from the age of royal travel in the 20th century, when various monarchs, the last couple of Georges, decided that when they were out of the country, they needed senior royals to be able to sign for them in some situations. So as the royal family's own website points out, they can't do everything. They can't do Commonwealth matters, fire Parliament, hire a Prime Minister, or create peers. But there's a lot of things they can do, like stand in for the King at Privy Council. Prince Andrew is still one of them. And whatever's called routine documents here, Prince Andrew can still sign. I think it's in a twosome with another one of the councillors of state. But again, this is set out by statute. It's not the King's personal decision. A lecturer in law from Bangor University in North Wales called Craig Prescott has rightly remarked here that the monarch really can't change this unilaterally. And also, intriguingly, and I'd invite follow-up on this from viewers, that royal assent can't be granted because, as he puts it, this needs a royal hand signature, a sign manual. And yet, by linking to the Royal Assent Act, he's given the game away here. I don't blame him for anything, but there's a lot of sleight of hand in this act as well, because the idea here is that law becomes assented to by the king, not when it's signed by his hand. We have doubts whether that often happens, but when a committee of lords brings it back to the House and says the king has agreed to it. Le roi le veut, in Norman French, is the phrase that makes something law. So a big old mess there, but Prince Andrew is still a representative of the king, and it's not likely that he could be booted out without a statutory change at Westminster.
Yes, indeed. Okay, thank you, Alex. Well, we're going to have to leave it there for today. I'm going to say thank you very much to Alex and Mark for joining us. Thank you for all of you for joining us. We'll be back in a couple of minutes for some extra if you're a UK Column member. Otherwise, don't forget the interview at 1 p.m. tomorrow on farming, and we'll see you at 1 p.m. for another news programme on Wednesday. See you then. Bye-bye.